Hey everybody, welcome to the video. It's Saturday, August 7th, and we're breaking down this 11-game main slate that we have over on DraftKings today, and this is looking like a pretty fun slate today. We have lots of good pitching options, and we have some bad pitching options, which is going to make the stacks pretty fun today. So we got elite level pitchers, and we got elite level stacks, so this should be a very fun slate. I'm definitely looking forward to breaking it down. There is a 5-game early slate, but I am keeping that on the Patreon today, so if you want to check it out, you know where to find it. But if you do find this video helpful in any way possible, please leave a like. That really helps me out in the YouTube algorithm. I know it's something small, but just leaving a like does help push it out to more eyeballs in the YouTube world. Subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already. You do enjoy the content that you are viewing. And if you want to follow me over on social media, you know where to find me using the handles in the bottom hand corner of your screen. And if you want to help with the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content. Link is down below in the description for that. But you can get access to my entire spreadsheet, not just a few players that I have listed here for you. My projections, optimizer, ownership projections, rankings, cheat sheets, data sheets, Discord community, all that fun stuff. Link is down below. It's like only $10 a month if you want to join the Discord, which I feel like is a pretty darn good deal. And last but not least, this video is sponsored by Prize Picks. I'm sure most of you know what it is by now, but if you don't, it's daily fantasy sports simplified, just you versus the projections. There's no sharks, 150 max contests or salary cap restrictions or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day, whether it's Vlad over 1.5 hits and walks or anything like that. There's some pretty soft lines you can take advantage of. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100. So it's an instant deposit match up to $100. It's free money. Why not use it to your advantage when you use code CPEN and tell them I sent you? But I think that's it for the plugs for the most part. So without further ado, let's dive into today's video. And as always, we'll start with the pitchers and move on to the stacks. And I only have 4 pitchers listed here for the sake of time. I will be here for a half an hour breaking down each and every single pitcher. But there's some other viable options like Luis Garcia, Julio Urias, and even Shane McClanahan. And even if we expand that to the early slate, there's some pretty solid pitching options like Carlos Rodon as well. So just an overall pretty good pitching slate. Last night's pitching slate was not that bad whatsoever, but I feel like recently we've been dealing with a lot of mediocre pitching slates. So this is a nice breath of fresh air recently. But let's start up top with Yu Darvish here, $10,100, and I'm willing to get burnt by him once again. His recent form is pretty terrible. He hasn't been good for like a month or so now, it feels like, and if you're looking at the game log, that kind of proves it. But his last game, he did have 10 strikeouts. Now, that did come up with 5 runs given up to the Rockies away from Coors Field, which is pretty terrible. He even gave up a solo shot to German Marquez, I believe, if I remember correctly, unless MLB app was lying to me. But this is a pretty good spot as a righty versus Arizona. They're actually somewhat okay versus lefties, and we kind of saw that versus Alex Wood a couple days ago. But versus righties, their numbers are pretty darn terrible in almost all aspects. They do walk a little bit, but they only have a 134 team ISO to righties, about a 25% K rate, only an 80 WRC plus, which is almost on par with the Rockies versus righties. Only a 293 WOBA, so this is actually a pretty good spot for Yu Darvish, and Vegas would agree. They have a team total below 3 here. He's a very heavy favorite, 73% chance for a win, and a 6.5 K prop. And if we're looking at Darvish's numbers on the season, they're overall pretty good. Now, the XFIP kind of scares me because it's close to 4, but the Sierra's below 3.5, which is kind of right on par with the ZRA. 29% K rate, only walking about 2 guys per 9 innings. The one problem with Darvish this year is he's giving up quite a bit of power, close to a 200 ISO given up, close to a 50% fly ball rate. Despite only a hard contact rate of 29%, he's giving up around 1.5 homers per 9. So it's kind of weird for Darvish this year, but it's a good spot versus Arizona, the lowest implied team total on the slate currently. And there's nothing out here for Woodruff. Can't really imagine the Giants would be below 3 with how good their offense is. But Yu Darvish is a fine option. I know the recent form has been bad, but I'm willing to get burnt by him once again, which could be a mistake on my part, but I do think he's going to have some pretty high ownership today. So if you're going to fade him because of that, I totally understand that. It has worked out in your favor about the past month now. Then Brandon Woodruff here, $9,900. This is mainly just a bet on talent because this is a tough matchup versus the Giants. They will strike out more versus righties compared to lefties, but this is a team that's got plenty of power versus righties. Obviously, the addition of Chris Bryant's going to help things out as well offensively, and they just got Brandon Belt back, which is more lefty power right in the middle of the lineup. If I had to guess the Giants team total here, probably in the low 3s or mid 3s. Brandon Woodruff typically gets a lot of respect over in Vegas, and his numbers on the season have been pretty darn solid. Next fit below 3. Sierra of 3.25, a 30% K rate, a similar walk rate to Yu Darvish. But the thing, unlike Yu Darvish, is that Brandon Woodruff gives up pretty much 0 power whatsoever, only a 0.94 ISO given up on the season. A lean to the ground ball is only a 25% hard contact rate, less than a homer allowed per 9 inning. Now, if we're looking at the splits here for the Giants, like I said, they do carry plenty of pop versus righties. They have over a 200 ISO on the season and a 110 WRC plus, but they are striking out close to 26% of the time. And like I said, the addition of Chris Bryant helps them offensively, but he's a guy that will strike out quite a bit versus righties, so it can help Brandon Woodruff in that department. And he's a little bit cheaper than Yu Darvish. So if you can't afford both of these guys, Yu Darvish and Brandon Woodruff, They have very similar projections in my model right now, so if you just want to hit the discount there, I have no problem with that. And then dropping down to Charlie Morton here, 9,400 bucks. He actually gets a pretty good spot here versus a watered down Washington Nationals team. Outside of a couple guys like Juan Soto and Josh Bell, you're not really scared of anybody in this lineup. There's a pretty low implied team total here, 3.3. Pretty heavy favorite, 70% chance for a win, 7K prop. And if we're looking at his numbers this season, pretty solid, about a 3.5 xFIP, 3.68 Sierra, close to a 28% K rate. He will walk some guys, but it's nothing overly concerning in my opinion, especially in this matchup here versus Washington. Doesn't give much power, only a 114 ISO given up on the season, only a 29% fly ball rate, less than a 30% hard contact rate, and just less than a homer per 9 allowed. So I think Charlie Morton at 9,400 bucks. If you want to get away from Yu Darvish chalk, I don't hate him as an SP2 option. Like Brandon Woodruff, Charlie Morton would be a fine combo if you're going for a cheaper stack today. But there is some pretty good expensive stacks. So if you have to get to a value pitcher, Austin Gomber actually looks pretty interesting here at 6,600 bucks. I know there's an implied team total of over 4.5 here, but you got to keep in mind the Rockies bullpen is very bad. So assuming after Austin Gomber gets out of the game, that's probably when most of the damage will happen for Miami. And they're just not a very good team whatsoever. They were getting no hit for quite a while last night versus Marquez. I forget when that first hit or run came, but I remember looking in like the 4th or 5th inning, and I believe Miami didn't have a hit yet at that point. But Austin Gomber always gets disrespected by DraftKings. He's kind of like the Michael Brantley of pitching, where the guy's a solid pitcher. He's obviously not quite like a Brandon Woodruff or Charlie Morton kind of guy, but Michael Brantley should always be like around $4,500, if not a little bit more, but he's always $3,000. And Austin Gomber is probably like a pitcher that should be around like $7,500 to $8,000, and he's always in this low 6K range. So I always think he's always a pretty good value. And if we're looking at his numbers in the season, he's really not that bad. The ERA is around 4. The exit's about 3.25. This year is at 4, 24% K rate. Doesn't walk a ton of guys. It's a little bit up there at 7.5%, but nothing too crazy there. Kind of solid in the ISO department, 166 given up. Nothing too crazy that is below Yu Darvish, although it's getting a little bit up there. He's got a lean to the ground ball, is about a homer per 9, 34% hard contact rate. I mean, the guy's not a perfect pitcher, but for 6,600 bucks in a good matchup versus Miami, I mean, that team sucks. Like, there's no bat you should be scared of besides Jazz, and even then, that's a lefty on lefty matchup, so I mean, it kind of nullifies that. And on the season, Miami, they're striking out over 28% of the time versus lefties. Only a 136 team ISO, 285 open, and 81 WRC. Plus, I mean, Miami sucks, especially versus lefties. So Austin Gomber, I feel like he's in a pretty good spot. And you got to keep in mind, some of these numbers still include like partially of the season of Starling Marte and Adam Duvall. Both guys can hit lefties pretty well. So you take them out of the equation, it gets even worse. I mean, the cleanup hitter here is Lewis Brinson. He's $2,000 bucks. So I think if you need a cheap pitcher today to afford some expensive stacks, Austin Gomber is actually a pretty decent option here because I feel like he's just a little bit underpriced. Yeah, will he give up a run or two? Probably, but that could come with a handful of strikeouts. And if he can pick up the win, because I do think the Rocky stack looks pretty good today, if he can go those 5+ innings, he could easily score like 15, 20 points today, which at 6,600 bucks, it's definitely crushing value. So I think he's a fine, solid, cheap pitcher today. Again, not a ton of confidence there, but I love that price point quite a bit. But I think that's pretty much it for the pitching for the most part, so we can move right over to my favorite stacks tonight. And the first stack I want to talk about here is an expensive one, so if you want to make this work, you might have to dip down to the Austin Gomber range at pitcher today for your SP2. But it's a great spot here for the Tampa Bay Rays versus Spencer Watkins. They're on the road in Camden Yards, which is one of the best park boosts you can go from the Trop to Camden Yards. I mean, just one of the best places to hit all of baseball, especially in the summertime when it's hot and humid. Excellent hitting conditions. They scored around 10 or 11 runs last night, if I remember correctly. And Spencer Watkins is not a good pitcher whatsoever. Definitely a downgrade from John Means. They have a team total close to 6 here. The problem is all these guys are super expensive. Like Brandon Lau's above $6,000. I remember he was like in the low 4K range. G-Man Choi's even close to $5,000. Nelson Cruz mid-5. Same with Austin Meadows. Joey Wendell almost $5,000. Like this is a very, very expensive stack. So you're definitely paying a pretty penny for him, but really good spot here versus Watkins. If you're looking at his splits this season, he was getting lucky early on because he had an ERA like right around 1, but his xFIP in Sierra like close to 7. So his ERA is now close to 4, but the xFIP is still around 5.5, only a 16% K rate, double-digit walk rate. Not really giving up too much in the power department, but he's not a very good pitcher, and especially in Camden Yards versus the Rays, it's definitely a really good spot for all these guys. It's a very expensive stack, so you're going to have to go cheap at pitching. You're going to definitely have to find a value stack to pair with these guys, but just raw points-wise, these guys do look very, very good tonight, so I'll have plenty interest in the Tampa Bay Rays. And the next team I want to talk about has been on absolute fire, especially early on in the game. The past 2 games, they destroyed JT Brubaker and Will Crowe very early on. They kind of trailed off late, but I mean, they've done a ton of damage so far. 7 and 11 runs, I believe, the past 2 games, and they get another really good spot here versus Mitch Keller, and I love targeting the Reds at home in Cincinnati. It's Great American Small Park, one of the absolute best places to hit in all of baseball. It's hot and muggy this time of the year, And I mean, the Reds just should be able to smash Mitch Keller. I mean, they've been great the past 2 games. I don't really see that stopping here. If we're looking at Keller's splits on the season, he's got an ERA above 7, xFIP above 5, only a 21% K with 11.5% walk rate, and giving up over a 200 ISO on the season with close to a 40% hard contact rate and about 1.2 homers allowed per 9 innings, which is actually a little bit lower than you think it would be, but great spot for the Cincinnati Reds. They're a little bit expensive, not quite as expensive as the Tampa Bay Rays, though. But Jonathan India, feels like he homers each and every single day, even though he's not a huge power threat. Jesse Winker at $6,300, just raw points-wise, he's going to grab as the best play here. He has been crushing right-handed pitching this season. He showed that last night where I believe he had a double and a homer in his first 2 at-bats. Nick Castellanos is still too cheap. That'll come up close to $5,000 at some point, so keep taking advantage of that price point while you can for a guy that's batting around 330 with over a 400 WOBA on the season. Joey Votto feels like he goes deep every single day. Mike Moustakas made his return yesterday, and he made a lot of damage happen. Kyle Farmer, Taylor Naquin, Tucker Barnhart kind of lineup fillers at the end, but if you need some cheap guys, I think they are just fine. But yeah, I love the Cincinnati Reds here. They have a team total of 5.99, so probably going to be above 6. And I definitely think they keep the good times rolling here. So big fan of the Cincinnati Reds once again. I think they keep the good times rolling. Then moving on to the Houston Astros here, they actually find themselves in a pretty decent spot versus Michael Pineda. He's not the worst pitcher in the world, but the one thing he will struggle with is giving up power over a 200 ISO allowed this season. And the Astros just seem a bit too cheap in my opinion. Outside of Jose Altuve, no one else here is above $5,000, and outside of Yordan Alvarez and Jose Altuve, no one's above $4,000. So it's actually pretty easy to stack up the Astros. They have a team total of 5.25 here, and I mean, Altuve can hit righties fine. Michael Brantley's just way too cheap. He should always be like $1,500 or $2,000 more expensive than he is. Like, he's batting 330 on the season with a WOBA of around 375. Like, $3,000 is a joke of a price tag. Like, he shouldn't be like just a few hundred more dollars than a guy like Diaz or McCormick. So, love the price tag of Michael Brantley. He's definitely a cash game staple in my opinion. Yordan Alvarez has plenty of pop versus righties. Carlos Correa just seems a bit too cheap betting cleanup for the Astros tonight. Kyle Tucker, not a big batting average guy, but he can hit for power versus righties. And Diaz is just cheap. You can play him at first base and third base. And then the rest of the guys are kind of lineup fillers, but they are dirt cheap. So if you want to do like a real cheap Astros stack to pair with like maybe a Ray stack today, you could go with guys like McCormick, Jones, and Maldonado. But overall, I do like the Astros today. Just feel like they're a little bit too cheap in my opinion. And moving on to Coors Field here, I think we at least have to mention the Rockies. I'm never like a big fan of talking about the Rockies as a full-on stack because their offense is just not very good. But any single time they're in Coors Field in a good matchup, it's going to be like 90 degrees there in Denver today. It's going to be pretty good hitting conditions. Obviously, Coors Field, the best place to hit in all of baseball, so we at least have to talk about them. They scored 11 runs last night, and they had a pretty good matchup here versus Luzardo, who the Miami Marlins just traded for. But on the season, he's definitely had some real struggles versus righty bats, and overall, for looking at his splits this season, about a 4.6 xFIP, an ERA close to 7, a 23% K rate, and a 231 ISO given up. But if we look specifically to the righties this season, he's got about a 7.5 ERA, an xFIP close to 5, giving up a 284 ISO and over a 400 WOBA and close to 3 homers per 9. So the main appeal here is going to be the righty bats. So we have Brendan Rodgers, Trevor Story, CJ Cron, and Diaz and Hampson. I think those guys are all solid options. If we want to use some lefties like Tapia and Charlie Blackmon and McMahon in full-on stacks, I have no problem with that whatsoever. But the main appeal here is going to be the righties. CJ Cron, he hits for power versus left-handed pitching. Obviously, Trevor Story is a great option. And then Brendan Rodgers, who's kind of a cheaper guy here, but he's batting 280 in the season with over a 200 ISO. And yet, $3,800, that does look pretty darn good. And Diaz, I mean, he's actually shown some decent power this season. He only has a 222 batting average, but he's got a 213 ISO on the year, and he can hit lefties pretty well. So, mind some of these Rockies tonight, even though it's kind of an ugly team overall. And the last team I want to talk about is the Cleveland Indians here, and totally not being biased whatsoever mentioning the Indians, but they get a pretty good spot versus Tyler Alexander today. He's a pretty bad lefty for the most part. I mean, maybe not the worst pitcher out there, but he's not great. Definitely average to below average, and they have a team total above 5. And as bad as the Indians roster is right now, and they have a team total above 5, I definitely think we have to take some interest here. Plus, these guys are all pretty cheap for the most part outside of Ramirez and Jose Ramirez, so it's a very easy stack to stack today, and especially if you're going with some expensive pitching. I think the Indians actually look pretty decent here. They have Miles Straws, $2,300 leading off here versus the righty. I think he's fine. Obviously not a guy that has a ton of power, but in the leadoff spot, dirt cheap. Always have some interest there. Ahmed Rosario, $4,300. Not a super exciting bat, but he's just a solid guy. That's $4,300. Hitting in a good spot in the order. Jose Ramirez, he can crush left-handed pitching, although that comes with a massive price point of over $6,000. But a 271 ISO on the season with a 130 WRC plus. Framber Reyes is boasting over a 300 ISO this season overall, so obviously it's a great home run spot versus Tyler Alexander. Then we just have the cheap options here in Harold Ramirez, Bobby Bradley. I prefer him versus righties, but if you're doing a full-on stack, can't imagine he'll have much ownership in a lefty-on-lefty spot here. Then Mercado, Hedges, and Ernie Clement, which you're probably thinking, who the heck is Ernie Clement? And I don't blame you. He's got a .028 ISO in the season and a .211 batting average, so you could probably just skip over him. He's only got a 40 WRC plus on the season, although it's better than Austin Hedges. He's sitting at 26. So if you want to skip those two guys, I totally understand that, but the top half of this order is actually somewhat okay, I think, tonight, and they're pretty cheap outside of the couple bats, so don't hate the Indian stack today, and it'll allow you to afford some expensive pitching as well. That being said, I think that'll be pretty much it for the video, so I hope it was helpful, and if it was, make sure you leave a like, subscribe to the channel if you haven't yet already, follow me over on social media if you feel like that's something you want to do, and if you want to help support the channel over on Patreon, get access to some extra content. I do cover the sports on there as well, including NASCAR and the NFL. Link is down below in the description for that. And don't forget, this video was sponsored by Prize Picks. It's just you versus the projections, no sharks, salary cap restrictions, or anything like that. Just you versus the props that they offer each and every single day. And as of right now, if you're a new signee over on Prize Picks, you can get a free money bonus up to $100 using code CPEN, and you tell them I sent you. But I think that'll be pretty much it. Hope you guys enjoy the rest of your weekend, and I'll see you on Sunday for the next video.